upon pieces that had been just kind of put together to create this division, we decided it was in the best interest to bifurcate these two and to have the AUL focus on technology support services and the director who had been there before focus on the institutional repository that Denise had charged him with creating. Since then, the AUL for technology support services has resigned, and with her departure, we're going to be moving the digital initiatives in with collection services, so they'll be there with other units that manage collections, and digital reformatting is another way of managing collections. And the technology support services, we're relying upon the newly created enterprise technology services on campus to provide that service. Denise Stevens is also the acting CIO, so it was a very close conversation between the UL and the CIO in these regards. So those are some of the organizational changes that we've made in the last 2 years since I've been there. In the remaining time, I'd like to talk about the more long-term participative approach that I've been interested in developing. Last spring and last summer, I led, for the first time, the library through participative planning processes. So I met with all the departments, had them focus on values, had them talk about what their departmental mission was, what they thought the library mission was, what they thought the vision for the future would be. And then I had a retreat where we got everyone together and we created a list of shared values, we agreed upon a mission and a shared vision. This winter and spring, I expanded this to include not only people from within the library, but our campus community. So asking academics, faculty, administrators to come and talk about what they see the future directions of the library being. So our goal-setting process is one that's including the broader campus as well as the library. This is something that we're right in the midst of. Not only is it going to be used for setting goals, but I hope to use it to inform any future organizational realignments that we do. The other thing that I've been working on immediately actually upon my arrival was I initiated a process for filling the vacancies that we had. As I mentioned earlier, we had lots of vacancies. One of the things that was promised to Denise upon her recruitment as UL was that she would be allowed to fill all those vacancies. So the piece that I put in place that had not been there before, previous to that, all decisions about HR and where to add a position, where to take a position was done in a black box. No one knew what was going on. No one, and there was no record. So even I couldn't go back and discover what had happened in the past. So what I put in place was a request to fill form that asked the department head to outline what they need, why they need it, what the impact is going to be, what would be the consequences if the position was not funded, and what is the priority of this position? What would they do if funding in the future again became tight and they had to reduce their budget? What would happen to this position? So I asked them to do that thinking and to put it out on paper that is then kept with the recruitment file and is discoverable later. And it's also then shared with, we have a committee that I'm not sure exists in any other LAUC CAR. It's the Committee on Academic Appointments and Recruitments. It's kind of like a subset of CAPA. We have CAP and CAR. So we have two review committees instead of one at Santa Barbara. But anyway, so that packet goes to the LAUC committee that oversees recruitments in consultation with them to see if they have any input, suggestions, recommendations. So those are two ways that I'm trying to make the process of changing the shape of the library to be more inclusive and more participatory. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan. Up next is Mitchell. Also, if you need another refreshing beverage, please do so. We're all family here, so don't be shy.
Hi, my name is Mitchell Brown. I'm UC Irvine. Currently, I'm a scholar communications coordinator. I'm also a research librarian for chemistry, which is my primary areas, earth system science and Russian studies. And that last part always gets a joke. Why do I have Russian studies as part of my portfolio? It's one of those opportunities. I'm interviewing at Irvine, and they read through the entire resume, and then they say language abilities, and they ask, and they had a position that was being rotated among other librarians, and I have reading and writing experience in Russian, and they asked me if I'd step in and do that. And I am trained as a scientist and a physicist by training. Science librarian, I do a lot of things, but I've never been a humanities librarian before, which is a sort of an opening to. There's a lot of things that I've done in my career that I was trained for. There's a lot of work experience where I've either had to learn or adapt from the skill sets that I bring. I also used to be an apprentice pastry chef, which turns out to be interesting because anytime you have an opportunity to meet with faculty, coffee and cookies or cupcakes are a great way to begin a conversation. Yes, let me give you this little morsel. And yes, can I ask you to do something important for me? Like talk about your research and let me see if I can help you with that. Yes. All I'm waiting for is just a moment, a pause to say, let me consider this while I have another cookie. What we're really thinking about in terms of the UC Irvine experience is a title that I used, and it's something that we've used internally. So we also explored the term reorganization, restructuring, which we've used. And then came this next term, reinvigoration. So we're looking at not only the arrangement of people, the configuration of spaces, some extremely large changes within the profession, but how do we change that in a way that's positive? Because we were experiencing morale challenges, financial issues, uncertainty at a great level, and then administrative changes as well. How do we keep this going and come out at the end feeling better about ourselves and feeling like we've actually been able to be part of this process? LAUC was involved fundamentally at all of these levels, but it started out for a variety of reasons. So our reorganization process, I say started in 2010, some of those factors were beginning before that. So we had the effects of the economic downturn starting in March, April of 2008. Now, before this time, we're also discussing next generation technical services. So this idea that UC libraries are already discussing some very big changes, how to act as a system, how to do some things that we see as a value to the profession, but also value to the organizations. And then we have this economic change. We had a big change in our budget. We've experienced some permanent cuts. At our campus, it was 25% permanent in 1 year. And literally how to deal with that. I spelled attrition wrong. Staff retirements and attrition, so we had staff reductions. Some of them were, again, people decided, reached a time when I can gracefully exit. Other people decided to leave for other reasons. We were lucky at our campus not to have to experience layoffs. That was always a possibility, but our leadership always said, we will preserve personnel as much as we can. Unfortunately, that means we have to take it from other areas. Those other areas were collections without, well, trying not to make those cuts very deep, but mostly from support systems. So building maintenance, the kind of extra money we would use for replacing equipment. So we had a lot of savings to try to save people where possible. Serials cost controls really stepped in, and I'll talk a little bit about it because it's from my collections areas. We started making decisions. Christine, you had a question?
You also cut hours.
Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff I didn't include. We had all kinds of stuff. Serious cost controls, we started doing reductions. Some of that began with duplicate formats, moving to electronic only. We did some budget cutting, serious cuts too. So mainly it was a question of, we started with the things that were easy to do or possible. And then we moved to different layers of, this is not going to be fun, this is going to be painful, and this is really going to hurt, without trying to get to the lower part where this is not recoverable or this is devastating. We never quite got below that. I just don't really feel very comfortable with this. And we didn't get to the point of saying, I can't recover from a situation like that. We also had some very big changes in our administration. Our UL for 12 years announced he was retiring in 2009 and retired in 2010. We had an interim UL appointed. He was provisionally supposed to be there for 2 years, almost 3. Then he retired quickly. He had a health challenge as well. We had an interim UL appointed who was also an AUL within the organization. She was, at one point she had 3 major administrative appointments. She was the acting UL, she was continued to be the AUL for collections, and she was also the head of collection development. So she was making the decisions and then being the head responsible for those decisions and then signing off on those decisions. So even at the administration level, we had workload issues that were incredible. We had a real change in the amount of the people who were responsible for making some of these broad changes. And eventually she was appointed UL in October of 2012. I raised this because some of the things we're talking about, we continued with this reorganization change across 2 different ULs during a change when even the administration was going through a change of turmoil. So some of this was directed from upper levels and some of it was coming from underneath. So beginning of some of the changes, starting with Jerry Lowell, who was the first interim librarian from 2010-2011, he, to his credit, said, we're going to engage as many of the librarians as possible. So we had a call for participation. We had a group that was formed of both administrators, staff, and librarians for the structure of UL's UCI Libraries Task Force. Meet in a room. Those discussions were held in confidence for the groups there, but this is a group, if our staff was 52 librarians at the time and maybe 120 staff total, there's maybe 40 people involved in this, so it's a substantial number of people. The discussions were wide-ranging and sometimes quite emotional. The people were very passionately interested in having their voices heard. They could raise them and be even a little bit confrontational. During the sessions, it was all held with a level of respect. All of that conversation was held within that. It allowed people to really think outside of their current areas of understanding and really make some very bold proposals, some very far-reaching things. Some of those actually ended up being implemented. But the strategy was to contact and have the librarians, all the staff have input into how do we want the libraries to change. So we had town hall meetings where we asked the librarians, this is our economic challenge. This is a little bit of after 2009. How would you deal with this? How would you look to change the situation? Or how, short of actually bringing back that missing 25% of our budget going forward, what are your options? What would you do? And we have people throw everything out, really big ideas too. And then the next step was, okay, given that, how would you implement it? So not only we asked people, what would you do if you were in this situation? Our next step was, how are you going to go about making that happen? And then people thought, well, I can't do everything, but let's do some of the smaller ones. Let's do the big thing, planning for that, while we do the smaller stuff. we've got some really large ideas, so let's park those, but let's still think maybe they're a possibility. Some of these really big ideas were still next-gen technical services. But let's also think about how we're going to deal with the fact that we don't have enough budget money to require students, to hire students anymore. That's going to have an effect on hours, it's going to have an effect on some of the services we provide. Some of the structural changes that came about is there was a decision to go from a multiple reporting line environment that we had. We had librarians who were reporting to sometimes 2, sometimes 3 review initiators. We made a decision to change that structure. And we went through a process where we asked the librarians their preferences. There was a balancing procedure that came out. And roughly it was maybe a 40-40, 20% split, or maybe 45-45, 10% split between reference services, a new collections development department, and instruction, education and instruction. I personally ended up in collections. I could have ended in any of the 3, but I had preferences that I gave. What this did is, I still have responsibility in all those 3 areas. Being in collections, our group will emphasize projects or a certain level of expertise to focus on some of those issues, and then we take it out to our colleagues. Same with reference. There'll be an emphasis to look at large issues or do planning and then take those back. But I still do instruction, I still do reference. Ultimately, I think maybe we don't communicate between departments as well as we could, and we're still trying to make this work after a few years. It did balance the workload efficiently, and we've been able to handle, I'll do some collections, some really large projects without burdening everyone. So anytime we have to do a serials review, or if we have to do some really large reorganization of the physical structure within the library, collections was the lead for that, and I think honestly the rest of my colleagues were really glad that somebody else was willing to take on some of these huge projects. So we continued into these new areas. We have sort of an emphasis in the workloads. We also had a very big change that came later. We originally had a 4-unit designation, so we had public services, we had collection development, we had, I think, a freestanding technical services area. We might have had a freestanding IT over the years. Through some changes in the organization, it was decided to collapse these down into 3. And the big change was to incorporate technical services and collection development into one department. That was relabeled, and we call that research resources. We moved our IT under public services, so all the internal library operations, databases, and equipment support was added and maintained under public services, including our web presence. We recruited a new AUL for this new entity, John Renaud. And going forward, what we're doing is looking at incorporating the technical aspects of collection development, the support system, with the outward-facing part, the way people use it. Acquisitions, cataloging, metadata, binding, preservation. The digital projects group 2, we've called it divisions, units, subsets. How and what it is still under discussion. I hope, my earnest hope is, we continue to think about this, because in a lot of the planning that we've done, that is our future. Creating projects that are campus-specific, that generate from our own work, is the way of the future. Every time I try to explain why this is important, I remember a colleague of mine explained that this is how we ended up getting microfilm collections from Chadwick Healy, and this is not the same thing bad about a commercial provider, but Chadwick Healy realized that people were interested in reading Southern plantation notes, letters, and documentations in the South. And I know this because I was spending some time in LSU, early part of my career. So we had individual collections in small libraries around the South. And Chadwick Healy would agree to go in microfilm these sets for preservation for the local libraries, but then had a product that they could sell to other people. And everybody was interested in Southern Confederate area, but Southern literature. And suddenly, there was this new business opportunity that providers could go into special collections, capture that content in a form everybody could use, but we ended up having to buy it. And now is the future, is the time where we can say, maybe we want to create these projects ourselves. We will become the authors, and then we will distribute them, either for cost, but more, ideally more openly than the previous models. It's just my thought. I think, I want to say respectfully, because I don't do cataloging, but I deeply respect catalogers, that they have probably experienced the most cataclysmic change of any of us over the last 5 to 10 years. In our department, we lost at least half of the staff attritions were through technical service and cataloging. The kind of work that they do is radically changed, but ironically, it's still as important as it's ever been, essentially more important than it ever has been. We could rename it, and we have. It used to be AACR2, now it's RDA. It's doing other kinds of metadata work. It's description, it's organization, it's structure. Changes in personnel, job duties, the work. I remember a magazine, I think it might have actually been Public PC or Computing. Anyway, it's a cover that will continue to rise in people's minds. And the cover said Unix is dead. It was a magazine done in 80, 83, 85, 86. And they were probably right. Unix on a big mainframe was not the way that was going. 2 years later, Unix is alive and well because it's been repurposed as Linux, and now it's running on every web server, most every web server on the planet. Things will be reborn because fundamentally their structure is valuable, and this is how it's going to change. Cataloging is going to save our lives because all the digital projects we do need to be described, and all of the work that we no longer do will be swept up on all these new procedures. So the big change we've seen, massive reshifting of the upper organization, changes of the lower parts. Fundamentally, the job that I do now didn't exist 5 years ago because almost everything I did when I started at UCI has changed. I don't do collections the same way. Reference levels and service points have changed dramatically. I do liaison in a completely different way now. I'm engaged on a faculty level that is really much more extensive than it has been. So our library organization changed. And deeply, that's a scary, scary proposition. So the way that LAUC is involved, has been involved in, and I simply go back and I think of the kind of conversations we've had through assemblies and work from different presidents over time. I go back to 2009. We're talking about next generation breakout sessions. That was the Palm Desert LAUC. The work that Michael and Zawa did in 2010, the future of UC librarians, really raising to the point that we need to start thinking about our future. And a lot of it was driven about next generation, but this idea of how do we then capture this possibility for a new change. Unfortunately, it was during this cataclysmic economic problem too. Some of the work we did with Next Gen LAUC and the next steps for the future planning from Santa Cruz, or how to try to help the LAUC librarians leverage some of these new discussions. I think also to the benefit or the credit to our AULs, we had an AUL for